Good afternoon and welcome to NICER Global's weekly webinar. We once again apologize for the technical difficulties last Wednesday, and so we had to reschedule last Wednesday's webinar for today. Our focus today is going to be in the US investment immigration program. Before we begin, a few housekeeping announcements. The attendees, and thank you so much for being here today. See quite a few of you. Thank you so much for joining, and you will all be placed on listen-only mode. This is to enable enable this clear streaming of this webinar to all in attendance. There is a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. We do, as you can see on the pop-up window, there is a chat box. Please enter any questions that you may have specific to you or to the program. And there is a person from our team who's monitoring this and will collate all the questions for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We will try to do a judicious job of time. Although we have an hour scheduled, we plan to use less of your time and impart the sufficient information to you. And so without further ado, welcome to today's webinar. Again, the weekly webinar by NICER Global at 3 p.m. every Wednesday on investment-based migration and skill-based migration around the world. Before we start the webinar, I'd like to introduce my business partner, Mr. Mark Hazeman, who you can see on the screen here. Mark and I have been working together for over 8 years now, and Mark's an American, lives here in most of the year in India, and we work with families that are looking to migrate basis the investment route. Mark's background is that he's been in business development, mostly around real estate, mostly in real estate, but centered around golf, where he worked with Jack Nicklaus, one of the foremost golfers of all times and legends of golf, in doing golf course development work around the world. Has done a project here in India, actually, which is still one of India's best golf courses here in Delhi NCR, called in Manesar, called the ITC Classic, which brought him to India for the first time in the early 90s. Lived in Asia and done lots of work around Asia, Europe, and of course North America. Mark, to start off, a little bit of an introduction about ourselves. And then I'll be rejoining, and then I'll be coming back in to talk about EB5 before handing the baton back to Mark on a couple of closure topics. All right, Mark, starting off with you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go off camera as I start to go through these slides to save bandwidth, so you'll hear me, but you won't see me. Nice to meet everybody today. I guess I'd like to begin by saying migration is probably as old as mankind itself, when we roamed freely and settled where we found the best protection, shelter, and food. It's estimated that globally 250 million people live in a country in which they were not born. India itself has seen migration over hundreds of years, the Indian diaspora being found in almost every country on earth, in some cases going back generations. In the late 1980s, the world witnessed its first major structured investment immigration program, as citizens of Hong Kong started to migrate to Canada in anticipation of the British turnover to China, a phenomenon now that's sort of repeating itself, but that was really kind of where it all began. And today such programs are available in dozens of countries as the countries seek economic development in exchange for residency or citizenship. These programs essentially aim to attract foreign direct investment into the host country, and with it bring an upwardly mobile family that ultimately create even more economic value in the destination country, typically far in excess of the original investment. Investment immigration programs have been popular in China and Southeast Asia since their inception. And now as wealth and horizons have expanded, India is now seeing a very rapid increase in interest and use of investment-based migration programs, also business migration programs. We at NICE have been a front runner in this field starting in 2012, as Pankaj mentioned, and had the privilege of working with hundreds of families through their migration journey. We're proud to present new and emerging opportunities in this segment to our audiences in India. NICE Global, we like to say that we take an institutional approach to investment immigration. Next slide. Basically, our services at NICE corporately break into three main areas: investment immigration, which we'll spend the most time on today, but we also do skilled migration and business investment advisory services to the U.S., but also now to Ireland and to the U.K. and some other great places. Next slide. Countries and programs for investment immigration. There's several different ways of approaching this. Some countries, you get a passport by investment. In other words, as soon as you invest, you get a passport. You can see those listed there. Some, grant residency, and after you're a resident for the investment, and after you're a resident for a while, some specified period of time, you have the opportunity to apply for a passport. Business migration is a little bit different, and it is a little bit of a combination of all. In other words, you start a business somewhere. That business sometimes has to meet certain performance criteria, and sometimes it has to hire people. It all depends, but depending on the country. But the business migration, you become sort of a resident when you start the business, and then ultimately you also have the opportunity for citizenship. And it's important to note too that some countries have all these things, some countries have just ones, and it can change from time to time. This is a very fluid industry. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. Countries for skilled migration. Basically, Canada and Ireland are the two that we work with. And now I'd like to kind of turn it over to Joshi, who you've heard from a little bit, founder of NICE. Since 2010, Pankaj has led the firm in helping hundreds of families expand their international footprint. He's widely published and featured in national and international publications such as the Economic Times and Fortune magazine. He's spoken at and or hosted numerous conferences in conjunction with major Indian media such as the Times of India and CNBC. Pankaj is widely acknowledged as one of the foremost experts in India on the subject of economic migration, including investment immigration, skilled migration, business migration. Pankaj and the entire NICE team work tirelessly to help those interested in migration make a decision of a lifetime. We work very hard in making sure that you make the most well-informed decision possible, and once taken, that the process is transacted flawlessly. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Pankaj to give you the agenda and take it from here.
Thank you, Mark. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to turn off my camera as well so that you can stream the webinar and focus on the slides. Okay, so today's webinar is on the US investment immigration program called EB-5. We are going to divide this webinar into several parts. We will first talk a little bit about the program, introduce the process, and some elements of this program that are important, especially for the Indian market. We will talk about the two models that exist in the EB-5 program, the two approaches, a couple of projects that we have right now, investment opportunities that we have, and a little bit about our history and background in the other model. We will then get into some of the sources of funds and documentations and the important aspects that people should consider while looking at EB-5. So let me start off for the day. Well, the US investment-based immigration program, or EB-5, right? There are 4 programs that are available today, which are that can be used for the investment-based route. There is the L1 and the EB-1C, and the E2 and the EB-1C, which we will not talk about today, but these are programs we have worked with. Our focus today is going to be on the EB-5 project, which is either through the direct or the regional center route. So what are the two routes? So this is a program that was started way back in 1990 and started off when the world saw the emergence of other countries and programs. The US came up with a program which was centered around economic development. So instead of buying real estate and buying government bonds, etc., the US said, we will give our migration to people that are entrepreneurs, come to the US and create jobs. There were two. The original program was a direct investment, which required you to start your own business, and later they introduced, a couple of years later, they introduced a program called the Regional Center. The real difference between the two really is that a direct investment, both require you to create 10 jobs, and the real difference between the two really is in the way the jobs are counted. So in a direct investment, you must create 10 full-time jobs. So if, for example, NISA was to go set up a company in the US called NISA USA, NISA would need to create 10 full-time jobs for the qualifying investor, the promoter that's putting in the capital. In the regional center model, this was more of a pooling that went into financing of a larger project. The difference in the job count methodology is that it uses a method called RIMS2, which is an econometric formula, which basically takes the economic impact of the construction of the project at this particular location, includes construction jobs, indirect jobs, and induced jobs. In a nutshell, what this formula says is that the fact that there's a project that is being constructed, steel is being consumed, steel needs to be produced, steel needs to be transported, there's more jobs to this activity of construction than the actual construction workers working on the project. So in other words, a project or the regional center route does end up creating more jobs for EB5, can pool more EB5 investors into one project, and is by far the more popular route. The investment level is set at $1.8 million today. It used to be $1 million till November 2019, with the benefit that if your project or investment is located in what are called targeted employment areas or rural locations, the investment threshold is halved at $900,000 US. Typically, or I would say 99% or 99.9% of the EB5 that happens in a TEO or rural location, either in the direct or regional center method. The program is for an investor, and therefore the investor has to invest the fund. So it is an individual that puts in the money or the capital that qualifies the investor and the family for a green card. The requirements or eligibility is pretty easy, actually. If you think about it, you need to have a project or an investment that qualifies under the rules and norms of the program. The investors' documents, which essentially are mostly biometric documents like birth certificates, passports, marriage certificate, etc. And then the documentation that explains the sources of funds. How did you come to be the owner of the funds that are using for investment? The EB5 requirement for the projects to qualify is not as easy as it sounds. There is a certain documentation that goes into it and qualification criteria like business plans and job creations and investment documents. And you can try to get this project pre-approved, what is called an exemplar approval from USCIS before investors come in. At NISA, we've pretty much done all of this. We've actually worked with projects where we've taken it from inception stage, where we've actually created or helped create the qualifying documents for EB5 projects, as well as on the investor side, as well as qualifying investors. The beneficiaries of this green card program are investors, spouse, and all unmarried children under the age of 21 at the time of application and filing. What's the process? As you can see from just this flow chart, that it's not as easy as just make the investment and get a green card. The first step is, of course, when an application is filed. So we take together the investment selection that you've made, along with the investor and family's documentation, the source of the funds documentation, and proof of funds documentation. We'll get into all of this later, and we file the application. Typically, it takes about 18 to 48 months to get an adjudication. We've seen, with a median at about 2 to 2.5 years today. The application can attract what is called a request for evidence, which is essentially USCIS can review your application and ask you for more evidence, either in supporting of the project, which is rare, or in support of the individual sources of funds or some document of the individual that's missing. The application may be rejected, rare, but it does get rejected if there's something amiss. And once the application is approved, the file moves to what is called the National Visa Center for visa processing. Visa processing can be done for two types of people. Either you're in country in the US, for example, if you're there on an H-1B visa or a student visa, and you're the applicant, you are adjusted for change of status from your existing visa category to a green card holder within the US, a process called adjustment of status. Or if you're outside the US, in any country in the world, you go through what is called a consulate interview. It takes usually, once you are at NBC, for a couple of months for either of these two stages to get initiated. The consulate interview typically takes another 2-3 months to get scheduled. You go to the consulate, for example, in India, the consulate designated consulate is Mumbai. You get issued, they do an interview, they check that all your documentation and all the original documents, etc. And they give you a 6 months immigrant visa, which allows each member to enter the US, and you are processed as an immigrant at the port of entry. You do your biometrics and medical tests, etc., along with it in your own country, which are then submitted as part of your process. If you're in the US, immediately upon filing with NBC, you are issued what is called an EAD card, which is an authorization card which allows you to work in the US and travel internationally while your green card is getting processed. Once you get the EAD card, you get through the medical and the biometrics, etc. There's legal check in the US of your background, and you get issued, either case, once you enter, you get issued a conditional green card. This conditional green card is valid for 2 years. The condition on your green card is that you end up creating or proving that your investment has created 10 jobs. 3 months prior your 24-month expiry of your conditional green cards, in other words, 21 months from when you start, you have to file what is called the 829 removal of condition with the proof of your investment, the job creation, etc. that has happened for it, which then leads to the issuance or the removal of conditions and the issuance of the permanent green card. The permanent green card is for life, from 5 years from the date that you started off on your conditional green card is when you're eligible to apply for an American passport. So when I say that children under 21 are included, and of course unmarried, what happens, there is, as you can see from the process, there is significant time lag in filing today versus getting a conditional green card. What happens in the interim, or if the child crosses 21, right? Because the age needs to be 21 at the time of application, but maybe it's 3 or 4 years before you actually are eligible to get the green card. Now, this is an interesting thing because the US has an act called the Child Protection Act, which was essentially there to remove the disadvantage of processing time delays in the US immigration system to protect the age of children. The way this works is that as long as the application is filed before the 21st birthday of your child is included. For US migration purposes, the date of filing of your application freezes the age of the child, which then unfreezes when your application is approved. So, in other words, if your child is under 21, you file, your child will remain under 21 till you get approval, and as long as your NBC processing, which happens about a month or two after your application is approved, your child can still be included. We have done cases where the child was 5 days short or 10 days short of the 21st birthday and managed to get their green card. So this is a process that can be managed, but you need to be careful, you need to plan this ahead of time. Okay. There is another concept which is very critical in EB5, which hit India and has unhit India, if there is such a word, called visa retrogression, which essentially is that the US visa section, all visas in America have country caps, not more than 7% to a country. In 2019, we saw India hit the visa cap for the year and it was frozen. No more visas were issued to Indians under the EB5 program. Fortunately or unfortunately, due to processing delays at USCIS, there haven't been enough people that have showed up for visas since then, and therefore the visa retrogression has disappeared for India, although it technically still exists. But this is a phenomenon that if it hits you, can cause a lot of disruption to your migration program, especially impacting the aging out process of children. So while in 2018 and 19 at NISA, we introduced an expedited project that helped people beat the visa retrogression that was forthcoming, and we got everybody through before. Today, while we technically are not facing visa retrogression, it is still out there and can hit us. Now, the good news is that there is a change coming where because the US has cancelled one of the visa categories, there are going to be a higher number of visas available for India for the EB5 program, and therefore under the 7% rule, more visas per year. So hopefully this is not a phenomena that we have to deal with going forward, but it is something that hit the Chinese very, very, very hard, and they flew in absolutely blind into this. And the Chinese are still facing almost a 15-year backlog or a 15-year time lag between getting approved, filing today, getting approved, and getting a green card. So what this process, EB5 today for a Chinese can take up to 15 years. All right, like I said, there are two types of EB5 programs, the regional center program and the direct program. So let's first talk about the more popular regional center program. Well, the model is very simple. The investor invests into an SPV, which you can call it an investco, which in EB5 lingo is called the NCE, or the new commercial enterprise, which is where the pooling of investors happens for EB5, which then invests money further into the project co, which is in EB5 parlance called the job creating enterprise, which is the actual underlying project that you're investing into, which ultimately creates and allocates the jobs for the EB5 investors. There are essentially four players in this mix: the investor, the SPV, the NCE, and the JCE, or the project itself, and what is called the regional center. Now, the regional center is essentially a private body which is designated by USCIS and qualified to do EB5. Initially, this was defined by geography and industry. Rules were later amended with no limitations now. So back in the day when we started off, if you wanted to do a project, let's say in Gurgaon, Haryana, where our office is right now, we need to get a regional center license for Gurgaon, Haryana. And if you wanted to do a hotel project, it was qualified only for a hotel. But today, our regional center in Gurgaon can go and do a project in Goa, for example. All right, in Indian context. But the EB5, the regional center essentially can sponsor the qualification of the underlying project. There are three models in the market today. There are regional centers that are owned by the project developers. So the project and the regional center are ultimately owned by the parent, by the same company, which then also raises the EB5 money. We typically stay away from this model because of conflict of interest, except one project that we are doing, which is a model like this, because, and we'll get into why we're doing that. But typically, imagine that the investment company or the investment manager is the same company as the company in which the investment has gone. To our mind, there is always a conflict of interest. It is the second model, which is also there, is that the investco is owned by the regional center. So the regional center raises the money, which then goes into a project which is not owned by them, or in other words, it's a third-party project. Now, this is a typical model that you see with some of the larger EB5 regional center projects. We worked with this model as well before. It definitely has less conflict of interest, but it really then ultimately comes down into not about the regional center, but about the project. And we'll get into that aspect of EB5 a little bit. The third model is when the regional center is essentially available for rent. In other words, we could go set up the investco, raise EB5 money, rent an EB5 center to sponsor it, and invest into a project. This is a very interesting model because we are using this in our hybrid direct EB5 investment model that we are doing right now. We'll talk about three projects that we have available right now. Our first project available right now is a real estate development in San Diego, California. This project is promoted by a New York listed, it's a subsidiary. The promoter of the project is a 100% owned subsidiary of a major listed investment bank based out of New York. it's an amazing project because it's one of the only projects which has very little debt at 15%, the rest coming from promoters. In other words, it's highly under leveraged, which is great for EB5 investors. EB5 investors are in a first position mortgage. They own the title to the lands of the company. They have a 5-time security cover. The project is under construction. Jobs that are being created as we speak. It has a successful track record in EB5. This is their second project in EB5. First one has seen 250 investors, all approved. Project built, project sold. EB5 investment getting ready to be repaid back as soon as the time comes. The parent company has over 3 decades of experience in real estate development in the US, focused on the West and the East Coast. Their projects have been national award-winning projects that have been recognized for the high quality of the development. This company focuses on building what are called master planned communities. So they don't just do single housing buildings or tracts. They take a very large piece of land and they develop almost like a mini city. So they have projects that span over a decade and a half. They are currently the largest landowner in San Diego, California, which is the #1 real estate market in the United States, across the United States actually. And they have one of the most well-located land sites in San Diego, and pretty much the only development San Diego is going to see going forward. The project, like I said, is the developer is a company called HomeFed Corporation, 100% subsidiary of the Jefferies Financial Group, a multi-billion-dollar financial conglomerate based on New York. The company HomeFed is developing this phase 2, which is Costa Verde. Costa Verde is a land developer. In other words, their business is to do the master plan for the land. It's a mixed-use plan, residential, commercial, retail, others. The HomeFed does all the groundwork, site infrastructure, puts in the roads, utilities, water, etc. Makes all the public infrastructure like schools, does all the retail, etc. They will be doing some lots or rental real estate development, which they will continue to build, which they will build and lease and own. But their primary market is going to be to sell the lots or plots, as they're called, after the site is developed, to large home builders. Brookfield, Lennar and Shea. Brookfield Residential is part of the Brookfield Financial Group, which is again one of the largest financial institutions in the US. Lennar and Shea are publicly listed and the largest privately owned home builder. These home builders come in, they put in their own concepts and sell to the retail market. So effectively, the Costa Verde project is almost sold out for EB5 investors in terms of the realization of funds from the sale of lots, because the home builders have already come and blocked these the lots that are being developed at Costa Verde. Once again, that shows the steady cash flow, which essentially is very good for the EB5 investors to pay back the EB5. Another project that we've just introduced in India, unlike other projects that are all mostly to do with real estate of some sort, is a steel project in Arkansas. And this is the most advanced form of steel in the world today. Big River Steel is an award-winning steel project. Their phase 1 is operational. They're doing revenues of over $1 billion, clocking in more than $100 million per month in revenues, with a 2019 EBITDA of $270 million. Phase 2, which is like phase 1, which did have some EB5, is an $870 million expansion for line 2. So they're just to produce more of the steel that they're already selling a lot of. Fully financed EB5 is loan replacement capital. So EB5 loan, as it comes in, will replace a bridge loan that is already secured and invested in. Projects already under construction. EB5 is fully secured. EB5 jobs are already created with the amount of investment that has gone in till date. It is owned, and this is a very institutional project. The investment into Big River Steel are by some of the largest institutional investors in the US. TPG Capital, one of the largest private equity funds. Coach Group, which is one of the largest privately held corporates in the world by the Koch brothers. You can BNSF, which is a Berkshire Hathaway company. Berkshire Hathaway is Warren Buffett, if you know who that is. They're an investor into this. Entergy, RTDS, all extremely blue-blooded institutional investors. Are the investors and owners of the Big River Steel project itself. This is a regional center NCE model where the regional center is raising the money into the SPV and giving it to the project, which is the Big River Steel. The regional center is called Pine State, is owned by a Rockefeller group company and has an extremely 60-year-old economic development history in the region and is an absolutely blue-blooded capital group owned by a company called Arkansas Capital. The third project that we have is an expedited EB5 project called the Tryon Equestrian Center in Tryon, North Carolina. This is a different project from the above two because this is a multi-use center or a multi-use project in Tryon, which did not really have anything before this, which is centered around sports, equestrian sports. It is one of the foremost facilities for equestrian sports in the world. It hosted the 2018 World Equestrian Games. It's a mixed-use, multi-use development. They're building hotels, residential, retail. Everything on site is owned by Tryon. They own thousands of acres. It is approved for expedited EB5, which means that you can expect adjudication in 6 to 12 months. We've done more than 60 investors in this project. We've done in 2018 and 19, which are all on further stages of their green cards. Coming back to Big River Steel, coming back to Coda Vera, we've done investors into this project as well. Big River Steel is a new project. We're starting off investors into this project. Coming into a little bit about direct EB5. Well, this is a very interesting model because the direct EB5 model essentially requires that an investor starts a US entity which owns the business and hires an employee. In its most raw form, it requires that the employees need to be full-time employees on payrolls in the US, cannot be part-time, cannot be part-time replacement. So in other words, they have to be full-time payroll jobs. We've been using a direct EB5 model with a rental regional central model, which is what we call a hybrid model, wherein basically we take the investor or investors, set up an SPV company where they put in the money. The SPV company then has a project that it further invests the money into, and we get all of this sponsored by a regional center. This gets us the advantage of qualifying the jobs, the construction jobs, as well as the payroll job. So this gives us a larger job buffer than a direct model. Our EB5 services include, we work with clients that want to that have a project that they want to pursue on their own. We help them through the entire life cycle of that, and we have certain curated or created opportunities that we are offering in the market today. We do an entire spectrum of services. So we can work on the business advisory, trying to figure out if the idea is feasible, doing formal feasibility studies, getting all the EB5 investors done, investment documents done to qualify for the EB5 program. We can find the regional centers to rent. We can do complete documentation for both the project and the investor and help navigate the application filing and any RFEs, etc., that may come for it. We've done, again, we'll give you an example. We've done several direct EB5 projects. We did a motel and QSR site in Arizona. We had a couple of people who came to us with the site location with the idea that it's good for a hotel. We did a business plan, we did a feasibility study, defined the number of type of hotels, type of size of hotel, which type of flag to use, category of hotel, etc., what kind of QSR, whether it's drive-in, whether it's a drive-in plus, drive-through plus seating, how much seating, help them get some tie-ups done, etc., qualify the project for EB5, file the project for EB5. We have another, so again, just going on, we did all the deliverables from start to finish for this. We have a curated EB5 investment opportunity that we are doing a feasibility study for with a couple of investors for direct EB5. This is an opportunity we put together in senior and assisted living facilities in and around the Midwestern region of the United States. In and around Indiana in the Midwest region of the United States. Idea is to look at a 50 to 60 to maybe 80 room bedded facility, senior living or assisted living, $5 to $10 million cost per facility. Our idea is to, we've got several sites. Our idea is to create then a portfolio of such facilities, which we can then exit out of for individual investors when the time comes, selling the whole thing as one pool or a group of facilities. We again are working on the site's feasibility. We've got a development partner. We've got an operator who's actually got a significant track record in selling or filling these facilities and then operating these facilities. This is the model that we are making available to the markets in India at the moment. Okay, so a little bit today's agenda about how to choose top factors for consideration in EB5. It is a big, it is not as easy as it sounds. There are many slips between the cup and the lip when it comes to the EB5 program. The first question really that we are asked, and a lot of investors now, especially with the 900,000 price tag, come and say is, why do active and not passive? Why should I not do a direct investment? And why should I do a regional center or project investment, which typically pays anywhere between 0.25 to 0.5% per annum? And for an investment of $1 million, losing money or not earning money for a period of 5 to 7 years is a significant cost. Well, I guess really the difference is how actively involved can you be in such a business? Do you have the capacity to actually be able to choose, evaluate, and do this business? While we can help you with some of the curated opportunities we have, the risk with the direct investment versus the passive or the regional center model is that the direct business obviously comes with a higher risk in the business itself, whereas in the passive, while your money might be at risk, the jobs are getting created for sure, and therefore you can sit back and do whatever else you're doing in life while this is still happening for you. The next most important question is, how do you choose the project? What are the documentation? What happens with requests for evidence and notice of intent to die, approvals, counsel interview risk, fulfilling the condition and risk of this. We'll address all of these one by one. Choosing a project. Well, here is a very, very important aspect of EB5. It is an absolute misnomer that a regional center's track record has anything to do with the success of your EB5. Because the regional center is merely a conduit for your EB5. They are an agency that is taking your money and giving it to somebody else. That somebody else is who is actually responsible for the success of your EB5, because the jobs are being created in that somebody else, JCE. The money is given to the JCE, and the money must come back from the project or the JCE to enable the regional center to pay you back. The regional center is, on the other hand, earning a nice cut in between for managing this process, or earning money in the middle to do all of this, but absolutely no guarantee that the track record of previous project of that regional center is how your project is going to end up. In fact, every major regional center out there today has in their portfolio at least one project that has bombed. And it's not their fault, but the EB5 investors in that one project are, doomed, lost the money and the immigration. So the most important aspect when you're looking at EB5 is not to just evaluate the regional center, but is to evaluate the project itself. These regional centers are not regulated. It's not an institution. They are not professional fund managers. There may be conflicts of interest that cannot be seen or are not seen up front. So it is very, very important to identify, look at the project that you're lending to, the business of the project, the track record of the developer, the financial history of the actual owners of the project, than the regional center. The second important aspect is your EB5 is not equity, right? It's likely positioned as a loan or a preference equity or somewhere in between pure equity and pure debt. Very rare that an EB5 is in a first position lender, and because there is mostly in most EB5 projects, there is a bank. Please remember the bank has a first position mortgage, and no matter what you are, if you're not first position, you are not first position. And a lot of EB5 projects today have very thin slice left between what the bank owns. And therefore, if you're a mezzanine position EB5, and your third position or fourth position mortgage, like in most of the EB5 position cases, you are likely wiped out if everything was to go belly up. And third most important aspect is, what is the repayment source? How are you going to get paid back? Is the project for sale? Are we looking at refinance? Is it internal accruals, distribution of profits? Is it from revenues? What is it? We at NISA have been doing this since 2012, when we started off by our first project that we will define, that Mark will just describe a little bit later, which was really a project site. We worked through the documentation of the qualification. We got a regional center. We raised money. We lent it to the project. We're getting repaid, ready to get it refinanced, to pay it back. So we've seen all these risks of EB5 from the day that we started off. And at NISA, we have an absolutely clear vision on how we evaluate projects for risk and how we evaluate projects for that we put on the table here to our clients. Fortunately, our track record to date reflects that we've not been that wrong. How do you choose a regional center project? Again, let's get a little bit on the investor side. The most important part of the EB5 process is the sources of funds documents. Okay, how do you own the money? There is no right answer. There is no prescribed list. There is no do's and don'ts when it comes to the owners of the investor to prove his sources of funds. We've done all sorts of cases, salaried individuals to ancestral properties, just where we got approvals just showing the inheritance track of how you came to own the land or own the property, which was bought by a great grandfather, and how it came down to you, sold it today, got the money, turned to EB5, nothing else. No income tax returns. It doesn't matter what else you were doing. The only thing that matters is, where did you get the $900,000 today? Right? Where did those $900,000 come from? There are three aspects of this document: sources of funds, path of funds, and proof of funds. Path of funds is we actually have to show the tracing of this money. You sold the asset, the money came into your bank, you're using this money, you put it in a mutual fund, came back. We have to show the entire track of this money, and ultimately proof of funds, which is when the monies are deposited in banks. Our track record, we've done more than 300 applications to date, more than 275 approvals, 150 removals of conditions, investor pays back, more investors due to be paid back this year. We're pretty proud of our track record and very ingrained in the EB5 process. We will talk a little bit now about one of our first project that Mark and I did together way back in starting in 2012. Mark, I'm going to hand this over to you to describe a little bit about the background of this beautiful golf course that we see today, what it looked like when you started to develop the golf course back in the day, and what the history of this program is, and what EB5 did further into this project. Mark, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. What you're looking at here is the centerpiece of a project that's called Harbor Shores in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Benton Harbor is the headquarters of Whirlpool Corporation, the global headquarters, the big appliance manufacturer, which sells a lot of product here in India. The land that this project was built on was all former industrial wasteland, or was former industrial land that had gone to waste, a lot of it derelict, environmentally challenged, and so on and so forth. And Whirlpool and the local community wanted to do something to bring this land back to its, to make it useful to a higher and best use. So I was asked to form a team to lead a team that would come up with a plan and lead the development of this project to get the infrastructure and the central amenity in place. That central amenity turned out to be a golf course. Again, you see the picture here. That was designed by Jack Nicholas. The land this golf course sits on, parts of it was an old trash dump, parts of it were old housing, parts of it old factories and warehouses, and so on and so forth. Now is the focal point of a major resort community right on Lake Michigan. If you want to flip to the next slide, after we had completed this golf and the infrastructure portion, I had decided that my job there was pretty much finished. I was heading to India to work on some other things, one of which was in my mind was the EB5 program, because developers were starting to look at EB5 as a source of capital. And one such developer was right here at Harbor Shores. So after I left, this guy was interested to do a hotel there. That's about the time I met Pankaj and some other people, and so we decided to take a look at it. And as Pankaj mentioned, we were involved from the very beginning in all the document formation, everything. We really we were not the regional center. We were certainly not project owners or anything like that, but we did have sort of insider, in-depth knowledge of this project. And I think that is one of the things about the NYSA approach, is that we take, though we maybe didn't actually work there before they started to raise EB5 money, we take the approach that we need to know just as much about it as if we had. And so this was a project to do a hotel of 92 rooms and some condominiums that were going to be a harborfront circumstance. And basically, the project was very successful. We needed 36 investors. We got all the investors, and money was invested within 9 months. All the investors were approved. And now the project is in the process. The money is not due back yet, not for another couple of years, but the project is working on the repayment program. But the project's gone very well. And I guess this kind of goes to the reason for being for EB5 from the U.S. government standpoint. Benton Harbor was a town that had very high unemployment, very high poverty rate, the education rate was low, and this project was looked at as opportunity for job creation, and it did. This project created well over 400 jobs in this community of about 25,000 people. So it was successful from the project standpoint, that it raised capital. It was successful from the community standpoint, that it created jobs, and it was successful from the EB5 investor standpoint, from the standpoint that they've all got their green cards. So this is what it's all about, and this is the kind of project that we'd like to bring your way. And that's pretty much it. So Pankaj, back to you.
Yeah. So Mark, I don't know if you recall, but remember we went through like 17 versions of the private placement memorandum.
And I think, back and forth. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. It was a great way to start.
Yeah, it was a great way to start, and it's a great project. We go there. This is a picture from when you and I were there last, I guess, October.
Here. Yep. That's the end now as it's finished. It shows the harbor on the left where they have the I think about 40 boat slips, and then you see the 82-room hotel with the two top floors are condos, and the place is open and operating. COVID, of course, was a little bit of a setback, like it was for any hotel property in the world, but it's come back nicely and had a great summer.
Yeah, and that's me taking the picture of you in the boardroom. And
that's right.
Well, it's fun. We try to go there every year, just to catch up on the project. This project is coming up for refund in 2021. where
Right.
we would, let's see what happens. But the project's well positioned to be able to pay its money back. Well, we've got a few questions coming in, which we'll just get to, and I don't know if you want to stay on for this one, Mark, but I think this one is for you. Someone in the audience
Okay.
wants to know who's going to win the U.S. elections.
Hopefully the American people.
Well, okay. Well,
Yeah.
well, one of the we've got several questions coming in. Some of them are extremely personalized. We are going to reserve not answering those in the public, and we have noted down your contact details and etc. And we will get back to you individually on those. There are a few questions around the processing and expedite and timelines and child protection and all of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back into these slides, because again, while these are some very specific questions that people are asking, um, let me just explain this once again. Like I said, the child needs to be 21 at the time of the filing of the application. And the age gets locked in. Let's just say that the child is 20 years old and you file the application, and it takes 2 years to get approved. The child is technically 22, right? But for US migration purposes, those 2 years are discounted, and for migration age calculation, the child is still 20. So it's calendar age minus processing. Now, what happens if, now typically, once you get approved, your visa goes to NVC, you can pay your bill, the child's age is locked in thereafter, no matter how long it takes for conditional green card or the green card or the interview to come through. What happens if there is a retrogression or a backlog in the country is that if your application is approved, your child's calendar age starts ticking. You no longer have the benefit of reducing the processing time, or the processing time is finite, right? I mean, this taken 2 years, but it starts to age, and then you can only reduce 2 years from your child's calendar age to arrive at 21. If the processing or the file takes longer to reach NVC because of the visa backlog of your country, as in visa is not available, your child could potentially age out. Okay. So again, depending on countries of origin, we have this issue in Vietnam. Even now, we have this issue in India. Technically, we still have this issue in India because we're not seeing adjudication, so we don't know what's going to happen. It did hit India, and given the number of files that are already filed and number of visas that are supposed to be allocated, potentially India can be backlogged again. But of course, then there is the window that the number of visas are increasing for EB5, and therefore, this should be taken care of. But it is still a very fine line, and therefore you must understand this finitely for the exact age and calculations for your family circumstances and various scenarios that can play out. That's the age out question. And somebody asked me that about the Jeffries and the home fed model, and why isn't this conflict of interest, how this is managed. Well, interestingly, the management of conflict of interest in this case, why we accepted this project, which is the first time we've actually accepted it or done a project which qualifies with the same owner of the regional center, NCE and JCE, is because it's a publicly listed company. And therefore, by default, it's a financial institution and a publicly listed company. So it's a publicly listed financial institution. In other words, therefore, its compliance requirements for management of such situations is the highest that it gets in the United States Securities and Exchange rules. It's probably the only project out there that is reported on a quarterly basis on the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission website, and you can read about the progress and see the progress on the quarterly filings with the stock exchanges and the Securities Commission. So being publicly listed as and being a financial institution, their practices of the management of EB5 as just another financial product is at par with how they manage other people's money. So they have the same compliances where they have in their mutual funds, in their private equity funds, in their investment banking portfolio, and therefore it is absolutely arm's length distance. That is why its first position title on the land worth 5 times collateral coverage, etc. So the risk is so safe in this with lack of conflict, with no conflict of interest, and that is why we chose the Go to Better project for the first time in a model which is where the one company owns all three. But we've already seen in almost all other such cases in the large regional centers, there is already a lot of issues that are beginning to crop up. And so we've been very glad that we've stayed away from the large regional centers which own their own projects. And we would continue to do so going forward. All right, I guess, Mark, that's pretty much it. At NISA, we believe we have very deep knowledge and roots to successfully navigate the complexities of the investment immigration journey. We believe the world is your oyster, and you should too. There are lots of programs around the world that are available for you and your family to migrate under. We today talked about the US, but we have programs in Canada, we have programs in Europe, we have programs in the UK. And note, we've already started to distinguish between the two and don't say it in the same breath. Get in touch with us, call us, WhatsApp us. Our numbers are 99100966169. Visit our website, nisaglobal.com. Email us at contact@nisaglobal.com. Our executives, our client servicing, sales and servicing team will be in touch with you, and one of our senior members will be available to chat with you and to answer your direct questions. Our headquarters are here in Gurgaon, offices in India and Chandigarh and Mumbai. Get in touch with us. Look forward to helping you and your family through a migration journey. We're going to turn our cameras back on once before we sign off so that you can see that we're still around, we're still doing the webinar. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. Remember NISA Global's weekly webinar on investment and investment-based migration around the world every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Please keep following us. Please help us spread this information. If you have friends and family that could be interested in our webinar, get in touch with us, get the schedule, follow us, attend it. Of course, we are available for individual meetings, and we encourage all of that. But please help us by spreading the word of our weekly webinars. And thank you so much for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.